Yes.
So Green is speaking. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to our press conference, Women Leading Fossil Fuel Divestment and a Just Transition. My name is Osprey, Orielle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, WECAN. And I want to thank so much our esteemed speakers for joining us today and for your vital work and leadership. And I'm going to make some opening comments to contextualize our conversation. And then we're going to hear from Eriel Deranger. She is Athabasca, Chipewyan First Nation, and she's the Executive Director of Indigenous Climate Action. Then we'll be hearing from Tzeporah Berman, Chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And then we will hear from Leila Souza Lopez. She is the Executive Director of Amazon Watch. And I thank you all for being great allies and being in this work together. Frontline women and global advocates are building critical strategies for national and international divestment from harmful extractive industries, while also calling for justice and accountability from financial institutions and governments. It is far past time for investments and global economies to move toward a just transition that places people and planet first. To put this into context and the urgency of this moment, 60 of the largest banks in the world have put $4.6 trillion into fossil fuel financing since the adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement. And a report by the UN Environment Program found that governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than what would be consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. We cannot continue with these deadly numbers. We're asking, where is the government regulation? Where are the political leaders standing up to the fossil fuel industry? And where are the real commitments from governments and financial institutions to phase out fossil fuels and instead invest in a just transition? Many groups are organizing for have strategic campaigns to call for divestment, to stop fossil fuel infrastructure and extraction at the source, and to stop supply chains also that lead to deforestation. At WECAN, we have been working from various angles for divestment and fossil fuel phase-out, and this includes co-directing with Michelle Cook, founder of Divest, Invest, Protect, to provide a platform for Indigenous women leaders to meet face-to-face with representatives of financial institutions to expose injustices and directly share with these entities exactly how their fossil fuel financing violates human and indigenous rights while also driving climate disruption. We have found this to not only be an effective strategy for gaining advocacy results and policy changes, but also a vital place for truth to be spoken to power, and this is very important that we hear from these women. The key takeaway is that we need to urgently stop the flow of money to the fossil fuel industry and companies engaged in deforestation commodities, and instead have financial institutions and governments invest in renewable, regenerative energy and community-led solutions, and that in this context, human and indigenous rights are respected. In September of this year, WECAN released the second edition of our report just at Climate Week, the gendered and racial impacts of the fossil fuel industry and complicit financial institutions. And you can find this on our website. We really thought it was important to have a detailed analysis that came from a feminist perspective. This is an over 100-page report that spotlights the intersection of gender, race, and the fossil fuel industry and addresses the disproportionate gender and race-specific health and safety effects, as well as the human and indigenous rights issues of fossil fuel extraction and infrastructure in the United States and parts of Canada. These are interlocking issues that have been sorely neglected, and we have to get the climate justice framework into our assessment of the divestment community. We see women having very specific health impacts like breast cancer, ovarian diseases that are directly caused by the fossil fuel industry. We also released a call to action in September with recommendations for financial institutions and governments to immediately phase out fossil fuels, to ensure no-go zones for extractive industries in high biodiverse regions like the Amazon rainforest, and for financial institutions and governments to respect Indigenous and human rights and implement policies accordingly. So this also is a call for a call to action for people on planet that was released to governments during Climate Week. In October this year, together with BankTrack and 25 other CSOs, WECAN sent an open letter to the Equator Principles Association calling for the EPA to make a renewed commitment on climate, nature, and human and Indigenous rights before their 20th anniversary next year. The Equator Principles are an environmental and social risk management framework with over 130 of the world's major banks as signatories across 38 countries. Our letter makes the case for the EPA to start a process that will lead to an important and necessary expansion of the scope of risks that the Equator Principles set out to manage as the climate crisis escalates, because all too often they have risks to the banks, but not risks to human beings, not risks to nature. So we're really making this demand. Yesterday, we actually met with frontline leaders from impacted communities from Africa as well as Latin America, co-hosted by Global Witness and BankTrack and WECAN, and had a direct conversation with banks here to really put forward these values I'm speaking about. I also want to highlight the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which seeks to have government phase out to fossil fuels, and you're going to be hearing about that shortly. WECAN is honored to be on the steering committee of the treaty, and we think it is a central level for government action, and it's something that a lot of groups are campaigning for here at this COP to push for this non-proliferation treaty. We cannot avert the worst of the climate crisis if we do not stop the source of CO2 emissions, meaning stopping all fossil fuel expansion, as the International Energy Agency and the IPCC have clearly stated. And we must protect forests that are sequestering carbon and protect the rights and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples who are maintaining the health of the forests in their territories, as well as 80% of all biodiversity left on Earth. So the integration of Indigenous rights is also key to our divestment strategies. In closing, we have to move financing out from climate destruction and hold financial institutions, corporations, and governments accountable. We have to phase out fossil fuels, invest in the plethora of successful community-led solutions that will lead us to the healthy and equitable world that we seek. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I'm honored to hand the floor over to you, Eriel. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey. Glanete, dene sotleneta Eriel Tchekwie hushe, Deranger betsiini hasli, Athabasca Chipewyan, First Nation, Hotsi Helsi. My name is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger. I'm a member of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, which is located in the Treaty 8 territories of Northern Alberta in so-called Canada, and I'm the Executive Director of Indigenous Climate Action. And I think that Osprey hit on a really important point around what is the integration of a rights-based approach into divestment really look like, and why is it critical and important to understanding how we move from just divestment of moving money from one power to another, but how do we create a divestment movement that encompasses a justice framework? When we look to advocate for not only just the movement of money from dirty extractive oil and gas economies to regenerative economies, we have to look at what does that actually need to entail. As an Indigenous person from a territory that has been under threat and under attack by extractive resources with the largest industrial project on planet Earth, the Alberta tar sands, I have seen firsthand how big corporations and multinational corporations are invested in the destruction of our lands and territories. They're not just there to destroy the earth, though. They're there to make money. That is the bottom line for them. And how we move that and change the entire financial sector involves putting forward policies that protect not only the lands and territories and the planetary health, but the health of those that have protected these spaces since time immemorial. Indigenous peoples' rights have been advancing steadily and quickly since the passing of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. We have seen the advancement of Indigenous rights throughout not only the UN spaces here at the UNFCCC COP meetings, but within the CBD structures, and now we are starting to see it advance within the divestment movement. Indigenous rights-based approaches to divestment are critical and essential. But we have to talk their language because they're investing billions of dollars into projects that are violating our rights and that are violating our rights to free, prior, and informed consent over the control of our lands and territories. In order for us to move forward in a climate justice framework, we must demand that the financial institutions not just adopt policies to protect the earth, but policies to protect the people. And this is implementing tools of free, prior, and informed consent that will allow our communities to pull the levers and the alarm systems to demand that these projects are not invested in and that we move beyond just sort of moving money from one place to another. I want to name one other thing. When we talk about the source, stopping at the source, the financial sector, we also have to be talking about what is driving that source. For Indigenous peoples, climate change began at first contact. In North America, this was the culling of the bison. This was the transformation of our grasslands into agricultural fields. This was the mining of our oceans for fish. We saw colonialism breed extractivism and capitalism. And when we talk about addressing these sources, we have to be moving towards what it means to address those sources and change them and flip them on their head. This is not about putting a price on nature. This is about uplifting the rights of people and valuing it. One of the most amazing numbers that I have seen is that when Indigenous land defense and land defenders go out and protect our lands to stop fossil fuel expansion, we are vilified and we are criminalized. But when you put numbers to paper, what we have recognized and had been able to see in a report released by Indigenous Environmental Network, Indigenous Climate Action, and Oil Change International is Indigenous land defenders and land defense has equated to almost 2 billion tons of carbon being kept in the ground just from land defense alone. Indigenous rights equals climate mitigation, and it ushers in a new regenerative economy where we can invest in community solutions that are about relationships to land and place, the safeguarding of biodiversity, and the building of new economic structures that are not invested in extractivism and the destruction of Mother Earth. Thank you. Hi, hi, Masicho.
Thank you so much for your important comments and again, emphasizing the fact of the integral role of Indigenous rights as we move forward in divestment work. And I'd like to hand over the floor to you, Tzeporah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osprey. My name is Tzeporah Berman. I'm the International Program Director at Stand.Earth and the chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. We know that fossil fuel production is causing the climate, the health, and the global energy crises. As world leaders gather at this UN Climate Summit, it's time they end the expansion of new fossil fuel projects and financing of fossil fuel projects and commit to a plan and a timeline to phase out oil, gas, and coal in keeping with the science and in keeping with principles of equity. We need to fast-track a global fair transition to clean energy that leaves no country, no community, and no worker behind. A COP that does not address fossil fuels is a COP that doesn't address the root cause of climate change. The world is already enduring deadly floods, fires, and droughts due to our addiction to coal, oil, and gas. Air pollution is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally per year. Health risks, as well as loss and damages from climate change, will only escalate with every fraction of warming. We know that 3 things are responsible for the majority of emissions today: oil, gas, and coal. They're the primary cause of the destruction. 86% of carbon emissions currently trapped in our atmosphere are caused by oil, gas, and coal. Wealthy nations must pay for the wreckage they have caused while also avoiding further loss and damage and more deaths by ending the expansion of fossil fuels. This year, at COP27, governments gathering here must pick a side. Like the high-level expert group did on Tuesday, the United Nations appointed Catherine McKenna and other experts to address what makes real net zero. They couldn't have been clearer in their report. If we follow the science, that means no new fossil fuel expansion, no new fossil fuel infrastructure, and it means that offsets, if they're used at all, can only be used after companies, banks, and governments meet their own mitigation targets. Let's put that in contrast to the GFAN's Banks Initiative that we've heard a lot about here yesterday during Finance Day, but also last year at COP. GFAN's members who say they are committed to net zero are deeply involved in financing oil and gas expansion. In 2021, 44 of the largest members provided $143.6 billion in lending and underwriting for 75 companies doing the most to expand oil and gas. My own country has the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, here on our national delegation. RBC, since COP26, has spent $9.2 billion in fossil fuel finance since joining GFANs. We understand that conversations are beginning today on the cover text here at COP27. This year, our governments must tell the truth. They must respect the science and have the courage to acknowledge the need to stop fossil fuel expansion. No new projects, no new infrastructure, no new financing. What governments do here, the commitments they make, the policies they make, will create market certainty for the solutions that we need for a cleaner and safer world. We hear a lot that the money isn't there, so I wanted to put that into perspective as one of my final points. $100 billion, Americans spent that on their pets last year. $100 billion, it's the amount of profits that big oil companies made in the last quarter. Analysis this year calculates that the oil and gas industry made $2.8 billion a day in pure profit every day for the last 50 years. The most interesting solution proposed here at COP so far is Mia Mottley's global windfall tax. Tax 10% of the profits of just 15 of the large companies could deliver $37 billion in the last 9 months for a global just transition. We need our governments to stop hobnobbing with polluters and to get serious about stopping pollution. Today, Global Witness released a report that the delegates from the oil and gas sector are up 25% from last year. More than 600 people here are delegates from the fossil fuel companies. That's more than all of the delegates from the 10 most impacted vulnerable countries. These companies are not going to design their own demise. They are what are holding back climate progress and continuing to allow them here to design what the world does to address this crisis will only hold us back. Financial institutions need to commit to real net zero. They need to stop financing new fossil fuel projects and move quickly to divest. Let me be clear. It is not a transition if we are continuing to grow the problem. As we sit here in Africa today, in the Horn of Africa, a person is dying every 36 seconds due to climate-induced drought. Every dollar spent today on new fossil fuel expansion costs lives. On Tuesday, the president of Tuvalu announced its support for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, following a commitment by Vanuatu and support from Vanuatu for the Fossil Fuel Treaty at the United Nations General Assembly. We urge more countries to endorse the Fossil Fuel Treaty along with the WHO, the Vatican, and 70 cities who have now joined the call for a fossil fuel treaty, including Belém today from Brazil. I'm just going to end with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tzeporah. And I just wanted to also note, since you brought up GFANS, that it's really, when we were meeting with the banks, we were also commenting with them how just a few weeks ago, since they made all those commitments in Glasgow and all these different pledges, that the initiative for the Race to Zero, which was sort of built into the DNA of GFANS, was retracted a few weeks ago, and they now no longer are saying that their members need to adhere to the Race to Zero. I mean, they're taking a step backwards. So we do need to really push forward here at this COP and really hold our financial institutions accountable, as well as our governments, to move on stopping this fossil fuel expansion and investment. So thank you for that and those announcements about the fossil fuel treaty, which are very exciting. Thank you for your work on that. And we would love to now hear from Leila Salazar Lopez.
Thank you. Powerful women, warriors here. Thank you all for being here. My name is Leila Salazar Lopez. I'm the Executive Director of Amazon Watch. And I first want to begin by sharing a little bit about the state of the Amazon. Earlier this week, we were sitting on this very stage sharing about a newly released report called Amazonia Against the Clock: Where and How to Protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025. Why? This latest report, which was released at Climate Week in New York and then re-released on Monday with some new data, daunting data about the state of the Amazon rainforest, the world's largest and most biodiverse terrestrial ecosystem on our planet. It is at a tipping point. It's not nearing like we thought 20 years ago. It's at a tipping point. There are parts of Brazil and Bolivia that are unraveling, that have already crossed the point of no return. I never thought I would say that we were already at the tipping point. I thought it was something that we would see 20, 50 years in the future, and that we would be able to turn it back before we even got there. But the reality is that 26% of the Amazon rainforest is already deforested and degraded. The good news is that 6% of that is highly degraded and can be restored. 100 million acres can be protected by Indigenous peoples. Those are the best protected lands in the Amazon rainforest. And we can protect them. We do have hope because of the new elections in Brazil. We do have hope once again. The primary drivers of deforestation and degradation and what's causing the tipping point in the Amazon, some of the primary drivers are the extractive and fossil fuel industries. And they're not at it alone. It's governments, it's corporations, and it's their financial backers that are causing the destruction and the deforestation and the degradation of the Amazon rainforest, and the threats and the attacks, and frankly, the murders of Indigenous peoples. Brazil and Colombia are the most dangerous places to be earth defenders. And it is because of these industries. It's because of it's because these industries are incentivized to invest in this destruction. And so, together with Stand.Earth, Amazon Watch has been doing lots of research over the years. We've exposed the fossil fuel industries. We've exposed the banks, both asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street. These asset managers that are investing in oil companies like Peru, that are investing in oil companies that are deforesting and degrading the Amazon. We also have called out European banks. And because of our research and our engagement with some of these companies, I'm proud to say that all of the European banks that we've engaged with have made some kind of commitment And BNP Paribas actually said that they would no longer invest in any type of oil extraction or fossil fuel extraction in the Amazon ever again. So we know that we can influence these industries. We have to continue we have to continue putting the pressure on the asset managers, the financial institutions, banks like Citibank, which is the biggest investor in Amazon destruction today. So I call upon everyone listening today, and especially our global leaders, to ensure that the agreement that comes out of Egypt ensures that we protect the Amazon and ensures that financial investments don't continue destroying the Amazon. We need to ensure that no more investment in fossil fuel extraction exists to protect the Amazon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your comments. And I just want to close by saying that, this whole conversation is in the context of our endless economic growth system, which is completely dysfunctional, and we need to decolonize and deconstruct this economic system. And that's partly what's behind this whole divestment movement and also the phase out of fossil fuels from the government. We can no longer have an economy based on fossil fuels, economy based on extractivism. And so the deeper conversation we want to also leave you with is it's time to build a new economy that is within the carrying capacity of nature and respects human indigenous rights. And this is what we're really calling for, is that we need a systemic analysis and a systemic change. And it begins by governments really phasing out fossil fuels, having regulations that really work for the planet, caring for the Amazon and other regions of the world. And it also must put communities first, and that we really need to look at how financial institutions could actually really help asset management firms, banks, can move their money into community-led solutions and move away from destruction. And we're asking them for their leadership as well as governments. So thank you all very much for your comments, and thank you all for joining us. Quick photo. Catherine.